What happens when a movie claims it's showing you the truth, but the truth is really a marketing trick designed to make you squirm? Exploitation cinema built entire fortunes on that gamble. These films weren't just stories, they were sold as real, with posters screaming about headlines, court cases, or shocking events. And audiences ate it up until outrage boiled over. So, which films blurred fact and fiction so hard that police, critics, and fans couldn't look away? Let's dive into the chaos. Snuff 1976. Imagine walking into a theater and being told you're about to witness a real-life killing on film. That's the promise behind Snuff, one of the most infamous exploitation titles of the 1970s. The movie itself began as a cheap South American thriller, with a cult wreaking havoc, but the story wasn't what made headlines. Distributor Alan Shackleton took this half-finished film, slapped on a new ending that looked like a grainy behind-the-scenes killing, and rebranded the whole package as proof of something audiences had never dared to imagine. The posters screamed with taunts like, "the film that could only be made in South America, where life is cheap." It was all hype, but audiences bought it. Police departments were flooded with calls. Protest groups marched outside theaters. Even the FBI stepped in to investigate, only to discover the supposed real killing was nothing more than rubber props and ketchup-thick effects. By then, the damage or the success was already done. Snuff became a midnight sensation. Lines wrapped around grindhouses as curious moviegoers begged to see the film too dangerous for the law. Shackleton laughed all the way to the bank, having turned a flop into a legend. Critics trashed it. But in exploitation cinema, bad press was the best press. Snuff's legacy isn't about the film itself. It's about the marketing lie bold enough to fool a nation. It proved that if you package a story as true, you can terrify officials, outrage communities, and still pack theaters with people desperate to test whether they could stomach it. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few exploitation films divided audiences like I Spit on Your Grave, originally released under the quieter title Day of the Woman. The setup was simple. A young writer retreats to the countryside to work on her novel, only to face unspeakable cruelty. What followed was a relentless story of vengeance, marketed with posters screaming that it was based on true events. For audiences in the late 1970s, that claim turned the film into a cultural lightning rod. Activist groups immediately rallied against it, claiming the film glorified cruelty rather than condemning it. In some cities, theaters showing it were surrounded by picketers who demanded screenings be shut down. Police in certain states even went so far as to confiscate reels, treating the movie as if it were a threat to public decency. Critics piled on too. Roger Ebert famously stormed out of a screening, later blasting it in print as vile garbage. But while authorities and critics fought to bury it, word of mouth had the opposite effect. In underground circuits and grimy grindhouses, I Spit on Your Grave became a dare. Audiences lined up not because they believed it was art, but because they couldn't resist testing themselves against its raw brutality. The more it was condemned, the more people wanted to see it. By the end of the decade, the movie had carved its name into the history of exploitation. To this day, debates rage on about whether it's trash, catharsis, or something in between. But one thing is certain. The true story label supercharged its notoriety, transforming it from a low-budget obscurity into one of the most infamous exploitation titles ever released. It was proof that when a film is sold as real, even the angriest protests can't kill the curiosity it sparks. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. This wasn't just a horror movie, it was sold as a nightmare, ripped straight from real life. When the Texas Chainsaw Massacre hit theaters in 1974, its posters didn't talk about actors or directors. They shouted a chilling message: what happened is true. The line was enough to freeze audiences before the projector even rolled. The truth? The movie wasn't documenting an actual event. It was loosely inspired by the real-life crimes of Ed Gein, but twisted into something even more grotesque. The film's gritty documentary-style camera work made the illusion feel real. Every shaky shot, every grimy detail of Leatherface's farmhouse made people wonder if they were watching something stolen from a police file. Parents wrote angry letters demanding bans. Drive-in theaters were mobbed, with curious teenagers daring each other to make it through without bolting to the car. In some towns, authorities actually warned people not to bring children anywhere near the screen, calling it psychological torture disguised as truth. The outrage became part of the film's power. The marketing team leaned into it, refusing to back down from the true story angle, even as critics fumed. That gamble turned a shoestring budget of less than $140,000 into a box office juggernaut that grossed over $30 million worldwide. The legend of Leatherface lived on, not because the film was real, but because so many people believed it could be. To this day, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre stands as one of the greatest marketing hoaxes in film history. By convincing audiences it was true, it terrified an entire generation and proved that, based on real events, can sell tickets faster than any star's name ever could. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. If ever a film blurred the line between fiction and fact to dangerous levels, it was Cannibal Holocaust. Released in 1980, this Italian exploitation film claimed to be a recovered documentary, showing the lost footage of a film crew who ventured deep into the Amazon and never returned. The marketing leaned hard into the true story angle, warning audiences that what they were about to see was authentic, and many believed it. Screenings ended with fainting spells, walkouts, and newspaper headlines accusing the filmmakers of showing real harm on screen. Authorities didn't just take notice, they took action. In Italy, director Ruggero Deodato was arrested and charged with obscenity, and briefly suspected of filming actual killings. He had to bring his cast members into court to prove they were alive. The charges were dropped, but the legend was already cemented. In America and Europe, theaters seized on the controversy. They marketed Cannibal Holocaust as too real for the faint of heart, knowing full well the whispers about its authenticity would fill seats. Censors in dozens of countries banned it outright, which only made underground fans hungrier to get their hands on it. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated like contraband, each one fueling the myth that this wasn't just a film, but evidence. Critics predictably called it vile trash. But among exploitation fans, it became an instant classic, not for the story, but for the chaos it caused. Cannibal Holocaust proved that if you blur the line between fiction and reality just enough, you can shake entire governments and still walk away with a cult following. The outrage wasn't a side effect, it was the whole point. Faces of Death 1978. What if a movie promised you real death on screen? That's exactly how Faces of Death was sold when it debuted in 1978. Marketed as a true documentary of shocking footage from around the world, it promised to reveal what no one else dared show. The VHS covers were plastered with warnings, banned in 40 countries. For curious teenagers, that warning was an irresistible dare. The film mixed staged gore with actual morgue and accident footage, creating a Frankenstein's monster of truth and fiction. Audiences couldn't tell the difference, and that was the point. Some people walked out convinced they had just witnessed the most disturbing documentary ever made. Others wrote angry letters demanding it be pulled from shelves. Authorities in countries like the UK went further, adding Faces of Death to their official list of banned titles. And yet, despite or because of the bans, the movie made millions. It became one of the highest-grossing direct-to-video releases of the 1980s, passed around sleepovers and college dorms like forbidden treasure. Critics dismissed it as nothing but shock tactics. Parents called it dangerous. But for an entire generation, Faces of Death became a rite of passage, the movie you whispered about but weren't supposed to see. The genius, if you can call it that, was in its marketing. By presenting itself as true, Faces of Death became more than just a film. It became a dare, a rumor, and a badge of courage for those who made it through. It blurred the line so completely that the myth outlived the reality, turning a cheaply made exploitation flick into one of the most notorious true films ever sold. Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's debut film didn't just promise scares, it promised reality. The poster tagline said it all. It's only a movie. Only a movie. But behind that nervous repetition was a more sinister suggestion. What you were about to see could really happen. Loosely inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, Craven sold Last House on the Left as a raw dramatization of crimes plucked straight from the headlines. The movie followed two teenage girls on their way to a concert who cross paths with a gang of drifters. What unfolds is a grim tale of cruelty and revenge that left audiences shaken. Theater owners leaned into the true story marketing, plastering ads with warnings that it was based on fact. For many moviegoers in 1972, that claim turned it from a horror flick into a terrifying possibility. The backlash was instant. Parents' groups demanded bans. Some screenings were interrupted by protests, while in certain towns, local councils forced theaters to pull the film entirely. Even the Motion Picture Association tried to cut it down, insisting Craven soften his vision before giving it a rating. Critics were polarized. Some dismissed it as exploitative garbage, while others admitted it was a chilling reflection of violence in American life. Despite the outrage, or maybe because of it, the film found its audience. Underground fans treated it like contraband, whispering about its real story and daring each other to watch. Over time, it gained cult status, eventually earning praise from directors like Quentin Tarantino, who saw it as proof of how horror could push cultural buttons. But in 1972, Last House on the Left wasn't art. It was a scandal, sold to the public as truth. And that little marketing trick turned a low-budget shocker into one of the most infamous films of its era. Blood Feast, 1963. If you're looking for the moment based on true events became a ticket-selling weapon in exploitation cinema, look no further than Blood Feast. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, this Miami-set horror promised something outrageous. A killer catering ritualistic feasts using unwilling victims. On the surface, it was pure pulp, but Lewis marketed it like a ripped-from-the-newspaper's nightmare, daring audiences to believe it could actually happen. The movie was made on a shoestring budget of around $24,000, with effects that looked more like paint than blood. But what mattered wasn't how realistic it looked, it was how real it was sold. Theaters advertised it as true crimes brought to the screen. Nurses were stationed in lobbies to treat fainting patrons. Some drive-ins handed out barf bags as a gimmick, playing into the idea that this was not just entertainment, but a real-life horror brought to film. Authorities didn't take kindly to the marketing. In several cities, police raided theaters and seized reels, claiming the movie went too far. Censors refused to rate it, and newspapers slammed it as trash unfit for civilized viewers. But Lewis, ever the showman, used those attacks as free advertising. He plastered critics' insults on posters and laughed all the way to the bank as the film grossed millions. Blood Feast's real genius wasn't its story, it was the outrage. By selling it as true, Lewis proved that audiences would pay to be scandalized, even if they hated themselves for it afterward. The film didn't just make money. It launched the entire splatter genre, showing future filmmakers that reality, even a faked one, was the most profitable gimmick of all. Forced Entry, 1973. Some films are remembered for their artistry. Forced Entry is remembered for the chaos it caused. Released in the early 1970s, this grim little thriller followed a disturbed Vietnam veteran spiraling into violence. The film was marketed as based on real headlines, playing off anxieties about veterans returning home with psychological scars. For audiences at the time, that claim hit too close to reality. Shot on a minuscule budget in New York, the movie's raw, handheld camera work only added to the illusion that this was more fact than fiction. Posters teased that it was ripped straight from actual crimes, that marketing worked, but it also brought the law crashing down on it. In multiple states, police raided screenings and arrested theater owners for showing what they deemed obscene. Some cities banned it outright, while underground theaters proudly billed it as the movie too hot for the law. Critics slammed it, arguing it had no artistic merit whatsoever. But the backlash made it irresistible to a certain kind of moviegoer. College kids, counterculture rebels, and grindhouse regulars packed theaters just to say they had seen it. The more newspapers condemned it, the longer the line stretched outside. In hindsight, Forced Entry is often cited as one of the rawest examples of marketing fiction as truth. By draping itself in the disguise of reality, it became more than a movie. It became a battleground over free expression. It wasn't polished, it wasn't art, and it certainly wasn't pretty, but it showed just how far filmmakers were willing to go to turn outrage into profit. Love Camp 7, 1969. If there was ever a film that flaunted its true story claims like a badge of honor, it was Love Camp 7. Released in 1969, it was marketed as a daring dramatization of secret prisoner camps during World War II. Posters hinted that its shocking content was pulled straight from real wartime files, daring audiences to peek behind the curtain of history. For many, that true account label made it irresistible. For others, it was infuriating. The film followed two undercover agents who infiltrate a camp under the pretense of rescue only to uncover scenes of relentless cruelty. Critics blasted it as degrading beyond belief, while activists called it a dangerous distortion of history. In Chicago, protests erupted inside theaters. Activists literally threw red paint across screens mid-showing to symbolize blood, forcing police to intervene. Arrests followed, and the chaos only pushed the film further into the headlines. Cities like Boston and Los Angeles banned it outright, while in Europe, it remained blacklisted for decades. Yet on the underground circuit, Love Camp 7 thrived. Reports suggest it made over $2 million in grindhouse rentals, a staggering sum for a cheaply shot exploitation flick. Distributors marketed it as forbidden fruit, and lines of curious moviegoers wrapped around the block. The irony? The more critics and activists tried to bury it, the more people wanted to see it. By presenting itself as true, Love Camp 7 blurred the line between history lesson and pulp fantasy, cashing in on outrage at every turn. Today, it's remembered less for its story and more for the uproar it sparked, a case study in how pretending to be real can make a film infamous forever. Women in Cages 1971. By the early 1970s, Hollywood had a new fascination: women in prison movies. But few leaned into the true story angle as aggressively as Women in Cages. Directed in the Philippines by Gerardo de Leon and produced by exploitation king Roger Corman, it was advertised as an exposé of real prison hellholes, supposedly inspired by true accounts of political detainees and corruption. The film starred Pam Grier as a ruthless warden who oversaw shocking mistreatment. Trailers promised it was drawn from authentic cases, making it sound less like entertainment and more like a whistleblower documentary. That marketing worked a little too well. In the Philippines, officials bristled at the implication that their prison system was being exposed to the world. In the US, morality groups staged protests, claiming the film was nothing but sensationalism hiding under the banner of truth. Censors had a field day. Some regions demanded entire reels be cut, while others banned the film outright. But in grindhouses and drive-ins, audiences ate it up. The based-on-true events gimmick gave it an edge over dozens of similar titles flooding the market. Fans left theaters buzzing with the question, could this really happen behind prison walls? Financially, it was a success, grossing several $1 million on a budget that barely cracked six figures. For Pam Grier, it cemented her status as an exploitation superstar. For audiences, it blurred the line between fact and fiction so effectively that even critics admitted the marketing worked. Women in Cages prove that you don't need historical accuracy, just the hint of truth to send viewers running for tickets. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. What if your nightmare vacation was inspired by centuries-old folklore? That was the hook behind Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes. Released in 1977, the film was sold as inspired by a true story, specifically the legend of Sawney Bean, a Scottish clan rumored to have attacked travelers in the 15th century. The marketing suggested the same horrors could be lurking in the deserts of modern America. The plot followed a suburban family stranded in the Nevada desert, only to be hunted by a clan of brutal outsiders. It played like a survival story ripped straight from headlines that never existed, and audiences believed it. Posters teased that it was grounded in fact, daring moviegoers to imagine what might really be lurking off the highways. The response was divided. Some critics praised its gritty realism, while others blasted it as needlessly cruel. Families who stumbled into screenings expecting a routine thriller walked out in shock, convinced they'd been tricked into watching something disturbingly close to reality. Drive-ins across the Southwest played it as though it were an urban legend caught on film. The outrage, of course, only boosted ticket sales. Made for under $1 million, it raked in several times that at the box office and went on to become a cult classic. Craven's clever use of true story branding turned what could have been just another horror flick into a cultural talking point. The Hills Have Eyes thrived because it felt possible. It reminded audiences that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that sound like they could really happen just over the next hill. Mondokane, 1962. Before shockumentary was even a word, there was Mondokane. Marketed in America as a shocking exposé of real-world customs, it promised audiences they were about to witness bizarre rituals and extreme practices from around the globe. Posters warned that nothing had been staged, nothing faked. But the truth? Much of it was exaggerated, edited for maximum effect, or staged outright. Still, the label of true story was enough to drive people into theaters in droves. In conservative parts of the United States, police treated it as obscenity. Screenings were raided, reels were confiscated, and headlines denounced it as barbaric trash posing as documentary. Yet in cities like New York and Los Angeles, the opposite reaction occurred. Audiences flooded theaters, eager to see the film too real for the censors. Drive-ins billed it as dangerous cinema, and lines stretched long into the night. Critics were split. Some condemned it as manipulative and exploitative, while others argued it was groundbreaking in the way it blurred fiction and non-fiction. Either way, its marketing genius was undeniable. By claiming everything on screen was true, Mondokane gave audiences the thrill of witnessing forbidden reality, even if much of it wasn't real at all. The film's legacy is massive. It inspired countless sequels, imitators, and an entire Mondo subgenre built around presenting staged shock as fact. For better or worse, Mondokane proved that the easiest way to sell exploitation was to call it the truth. The Black Gestapo, 1975. Few exploitation films leaned harder into ripped from the headlines marketing than The Black Gestapo. Released in 1975, it was advertised as a story based on real urban militias, playing directly into America's growing fears about street patrols and paramilitary groups. Posters hinted it was inspired by actual movements, positioning the film as both a warning and a dare. The plot followed a neighborhood defense force that slowly spirals into corruption and brutality, echoing real debates of the 1970s about community control and political extremism. Viewers weren't told this was fiction. Instead, the marketing suggested it was happening right now in American cities. That angle gave the film an edge that unsettled some and thrilled others. Community leaders and activists were outraged. They argued the movie twisted real struggles into pulp entertainment, fueling fear instead of empathy. In several cities, protests erupted outside theaters, and organizers accused the filmmakers of irresponsibility. Critics, too, dismissed it as exploitation dressed up in politics, but controversy only boosted curiosity. On the grindhouse circuit, audiences lined up to see the forbidden movie, The Papers Condemned. Shot on a modest budget, The Black Gestapo earned back its costs many times over. For audiences, it blurred the line between news and fantasy so well that debates lingered long after the credits rolled. Was it a shocking commentary on power gone wrong, or just pulp pretending to be relevant? Today, it remains one of the boldest examples of exploitation sold as fact. It didn't just borrow from the headlines, it turned itself into the headline, leaving viewers to wonder if they'd just seen a warning about society or a fantasy dressed as truth. So, what did these 13 films really prove? That audiences love nothing more than the thrill of believing they're seeing the truth. Whether it was snuff tricking people with staged footage, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre daring viewers to believe it was ripped from police files, the gimmick worked. Outrage didn't bury these films, it made them legends. Which of these true story claims do you think went the farthest? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous lie in cinema is the one stamped on the poster.